More ups and downs for Donald Trump. His campaign chairman resigns just as Trump launches his first TV ad. The worst natural disaster since Hurricane Sandy.
This is going to be a long-term recovery.
Why many people in Louisiana didn't think they needed flood insurance. Olympic apology. A group of U.S. swimmers in a growing controversy. And remembering Mother Teresa. How Catholics prepare for her canonization. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, August 19th, 2016. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Jason Calvi, in for Brian Patrick with your news now. Another change for the Trump campaign. Chairman Paul Manafort has resigned. Sources say he wanted to stop being a distraction to Trump's campaign. Newspaper reports say Manafort was paid millions of dollars for advising pro-Russian groups in Ukraine. He took over as campaign chairman after Trump fired Corey Lewandowski earlier this summer. And for the first time, Donald Trump says he regrets some of his words on the campaign trail. Trump was rallying in Charlotte, North Carolina.
I do regret it, particularly where it may have caused personal pain. Too much is at stake for us to be consumed with these issues.
Trump says he's never been politically correct and says he hasn't always chosen the right words in the heat of a debate. And the Republican nominee puts out his first general election campaign ad. It compares his immigration plans with Hillary Clinton's.
In Hillary Clinton's America, the system stays rigged against Americans. Syrian refugees flood in. Illegal immigrants convicted of committing crimes get to stay.
The Trump campaign is spending close to $5 million to air the ads in the swing states of Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. Many have criticized Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server as Secretary of State. But former Secretary Colin Powell says he touted his own use of a private email server. Powell admits he told Clinton that personal email vastly improved communication within the State Department. He says he sent Clinton the memo after she took over in 2009.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Trump.
And crowds cheered today when Donald Trump and running mate Mike Pence showed up in flood-damaged Louisiana. Trump consoled people who had been trying to save their homes. He also met volunteers from a Christian group who have been cooking meals for flood victims and helping elderly residents. The Red Cross says the Louisiana flood is the worst natural disaster to strike the U.S. since Hurricane Sandy 4 years ago. At least 13 people died after more than 2 feet of rain caused historic flooding. The high waters damaged thousands of homes that have never flooded before, and many were not protected by flood insurance.
So the immediate issues are, how do we get people somewhere to stay and begin the process of recovery, and understand this is going to require a lot of other assistance and programs. This is going to be a long-term recovery, nothing that's going to get fixed overnight.
President Obama declared at least 20 parishes disaster areas, but so far he hasn't announced plans to visit the victims. A new wildfire is raging along California's central coast. The blaze started yesterday and quickly surged to 600 acres. Fire investigators pinpointed where it started in rural Santa Barbara County, but they haven't figured out the cause. And firefighters are making big gains against another California wildfire. This one, 60 miles east of Los Angeles. It started Tuesday. The massive 59 square mile blaze torched nearly 100 homes, forcing thousands to escape. And other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. U.S. swimmer Ryan Lochte is apologizing for his actions in Rio. He claimed he and fellow U.S. swimmers were robbed at gunpoint by men dressed as police. But Brazilian investigators say that's not true, and they have the surveillance video to prove it. The U.S. Olympic Committee apologizing for the actions of 4 U.S. swimmers and for distracting from the Olympic Games. The move is necessary, according to sports analyst Christine Brennan.
The nation's looking at this and saying, you know what, you're representing us. And in a country, Brazil, where the crime issue was so important, to tell any tall tale a lie, whatever it might be, that Ryan Lochte and the others told is something that just seems so wrong, especially at these games representing the United States.
According to a Facebook post from Brazilian civil police, Jack Kunger and Gunnar Benz said they were not victims of a robbery and said Ryan Lochte's version of events was not true. Lochte's attorney says Brazilian police have not again asked for his help, but investigators in Brazil say they're working with the U.S. to interview Lochte again. Even though it's likely no criminal charges will be filed, it could still cause trouble for the athletes.
The standards are higher for Olympic athletes than any other athletes. Olympic athletes are still role models and still have to play by a different set of rules. The U.S. Olympic Committee instills that thought. There's a code of conduct everyone has to sign. This is no joke.
And Lochte did leave Brazil earlier this week. Before his story came into question, 2 other swimmers left last night after being pulled off a plane the day before. The 4th swimmer paid over $10,000 in a court-approved deal to leave today. The NBA moves the location of its AllStar Game from Charlotte to New Orleans. The league is protesting North Carolina's gender law, which is designed to protect privacy in public bathrooms. Gay rights activists say transgender people should be able to use the bathroom of their choice. And a federal judge just threw out a lawsuit against Kim Davis. She's the county clerk in Kentucky who refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. 2 of the couples sued, but the judge dismissed their case. Davis's attorney says it's a victory for everyone who wants to remain true to their religious beliefs. And a federal judge blocks a Florida abortion law. The law would have stopped state funds from going to groups that do abortions. This after the administration of Governor Rick Scott made the unusual decision to drop further legal action. The law also was said to increase inspection requirements for abortion clinics, but Planned Parenthood challenged it in court. And joining us to talk about that right now is President of National Right to Life, Carol Tobias. This pro-life defeat of defunding Planned Parenthood, is there another way to defund it in places like Florida?
Well, it has been tried in some states where the state will say, we have so many dollars that can be used for family planning purposes. We are going to prioritize who gets those dollars. First will be publicly funded services to provide the family planning. Next will be those who have full medical services. And by the time we get to other organizations, which would include Planned Parenthood, we just don't have any money left. That can be a much more effective way, and we have seen in some states like Kansas and Tennessee where that actually does work. The problem is that Title X funds, which are the family planning funds that go to the states, can be controlled by the Department of Health and Human Services here in Washington. So these organizations, even though they may be denied funding in a particular state, can still go back to the federal government to get those block grants, and some of them have done.
And that's what I think happened in New Hampshire, actually. I think that's what happened up there, where the state defunded and then the federal government.
So we just need a whole new change in the Department of Health and Human Services, because they are more than willing to provide funds to Planned Parenthood, even if a state won't.
How do you change the leadership then of HHS? Where does
that has to be a cabinet level appointment, which comes from the president.
So as soon as the president comes into office, they could appoint new leadership, and it could change the whole policy with planning?
It could certainly have a huge impact. Now, some of that would still have to go back to Congress, I think, to do some prioritization of federal funds, but the Secretary of Health and Human Services has a huge impact and decision-making, administrative abilities.
Looking at another pro-life issue, assisted suicide, we've seen major defeats for pro-lifers in places like California. What's going on in Colorado, I believe, this fall?
There was a massive campaign from somebody to get signatures or petitions submitted to the state so that the voters in Colorado will be voting on whether or not physician-assisted suicide is legal within their state. We have been able to defeat assisted suicide measures in several states, like in Connecticut, New Jersey, even Colorado. Their legislature has twice voted to not allow physician-assisted suicide. In New Mexico, it was a state Supreme Court decision that said the Constitution did not allow for it. But in Colorado, the voters will have an opportunity to vote on this, and we certainly hope that they will reject it. There are no safeguards. They're saying this is for those who are terminally ill, less than 6 months to live, but we've seen in other states where that can really be abused.
Well, let's pray that everything works out in Colorado. Thank you so much, Carol Tobias. Thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Coming up, Florida's governor fights the spread of the Zika virus, but the number of cases is growing. And terror attack survivor, a Methodist leader, tells us what he witnessed. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. From today's gospel reading, thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Jason Calvi, in for Brian Patrick. The Centers for Disease Control says pregnant women should stay away from the South Beach area of Miami Beach. Florida Governor Rick Scott says they found 5 Zika cases there, making it the second spot in the state.
We have 36 cases. We have 20.6 million people living in our state. We probably had 65 million tourists already come to our state this year. We have 2 small areas, one less than a mile, and we've been able to reduce the footprint. We have another area now that's 1.5 miles.
Tourists flock to that part of South Beach. Governor Scott says the county is aggressively going after the mosquitoes which carry Zika. People of faith must stand together against hate, terror, and violence. That's the message from a Methodist leader who survived the terrorist attack at the Istanbul airport. Wyatt Goolsby spoke with him earlier today about his experience. Wyatt?
Jason, Thomas Kemper says witnessing the attack inside the Istanbul airport was a terrifying experience, but he also feels inspired, saying people of faith around the world now have an opportunity to spread hope and understanding.
I never had a moment like this where terror and death came so close. That was the most scary moment I had in my life, I think.
Thomas Kemper can remember nearly every detail of June 28th. On that day, 3 gunmen opened fire inside the international terminal at Ataturk Airport. Kemper was on a layover. He regularly travels as part of the United Methodist Church's global ministries, but he had never seen anything like the chaos that followed the shooting.
People started running where I was lying and in desperate, really crying and shouting and running, and I started run with them. You don't think much, you just enter into the panic.
Several dozen people died, including the gunmen who blew themselves up. Kemper says he hid in a back room in a kitchen until it was all over. All the while, he prayed that he would see his wife and family again.
There was also an assurance that I was in God's hands at this moment.
He says following terror attacks like Istanbul, Paris, and Orlando, Christian groups need to work together to spread a message of peace.
So we cannot let a small minority of violent, hate-filled people determine who we are as human beings. Our agenda should be determined by those people of goodwill who are ready to work together, who see religion as a way to peace and reconciliation, and I think we can find them in all religions.
Kemper says he's also grown in his personal faith since the attack. He tells other Christians he now regularly recalls the psalm, which says, "God is my refuge." Jason?
Wyatt, what an incredible story. Thank you very much. And Germany has proposed banning Muslim burkas and other face-covering veils at schools, government offices, and while driving. The country's interior minister tells reporters it's meant to promote security and national cohesion. Another German official says the burqa doesn't fit with Germany's view of women in a tolerant and free society. Critics of the proposed change say burqas have nothing to do with domestic security. And despite the threat of a lawsuit, a South Carolina school board moves to bring back prayer before its meetings. The Berkeley County School Board has been using a moment of silence during the meetings after prayer was dropped earlier this year. Americans United for Separation of Church and State claims the use of prayer is unconstitutional. Mac McQuillan is a member of the Berkeley County School Board and a lawyer. Mac, you're pushing to bring back prayer. What was your reaction with those saying you can't?
Well, I practice law for a living, and so I'm familiar with lawsuits, but when we first got the letter, my faith says that we want to be innocent as doves, but wise as serpents. And so I wanted to make sure that we crossed every I, or crossed every T, dotted every I, and that we were going to come up with a good policy that allowed us to pray in a constitutionally permissible manner so that we didn't have to pay these bullies, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, in D.C. So we want to make sure that we're doing it in a constitutionally permissible fashion.
But the other side, you mentioned Americans United for Separation of Church and State. They say prayer at school board meetings is unconstitutional.
Yeah, and that's what they do. I mean, these are the same folks that wanted to take God out of school, or the Pledge of Allegiance out of schools because it uses the word God. They wanted to get rid of the Christmas holiday stamp. They take extreme positions and they bully rural school districts like ours, and then send out a press release to their supporters to try to get attention. That's what they do.
Now they say they're going to be watching all of your meetings. Why was prayer dropped in the first place?
Again, we wanted to, when we first got the letter, we wanted to make sure that we were praying in a fully constitutionally permissible manner and complied with fairly recent United States Supreme Court's decisions on the issue.
Greece versus Galway, the case in New York, but that doesn't apply, at least Americans United say that doesn't apply to school boards. It only applies to city governments and state governments.
Yeah, we're all deliberative legislative bodies, though. The school board is just like Congress in the sense that we're there creating policy and governing. And so I don't see a difference. Every member of the United States Supreme Court in the town of Greece decision agreed that legislative prayer is constitutional. And as a school board, that's what we are. We're a deliberative public body.
So then why do you think it is important then to have prayer at the beginning of your meetings?
You know, for many of us from different faith backgrounds, our faith is what unites us and it motivates us to serve. And so we make very important decisions for our children and teachers on the school board. And for us as board members, starting with the prayer, it lends gravity to the importance of our decisions and the importance of that meeting. And so that's why it was very important to us. We've had a tradition in Berkeley County of praying for a long time. And so to us as board members, we wanted to continue that.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. Mac McKillen from the Berkeley County School Board. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Up next, Mother Teresa's legacy. The church gets ready for the canonization of the newest saint. And a film based on faith. What you should know about the release of Ben-Hur. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Jason Calvi, in for Brian Patrick. Mother Teresa will soon be named a saint. Pope Francis will canonize her on September 4th during this Jubilee Year of Mercy. And mercy is certainly something that inspired Mother Teresa's work with the poorest of the poor.
Mercy was like second nature to Mother because of the love she had for Jesus. And she invited everybody to put their hands and especially their heart to love. She showed also the way. Peace comes with a smile, and especially with the forgiveness. How Mother suffered so much when she saw broken families. For the children's sake, forgive and start again. Smile at each other. That was continuously the message Mother had. Pray together in the family. Then you will have the grace to remain together.
Sister Prema took over as Superior General of the Missionaries of Charity in 2009. She's from Germany, but after reading a biography of Mother Teresa, she felt called to move to India. Enjoying the order, it has 5,000 sisters worldwide. Joining us now is Dr. Matthew Bunsen, historian, theologian, EWTN senior contributor. You know, the canonization of Mother Teresa is going to draw hundreds of thousands, if not millions, to Rome. But you say it might also bring negative media attention. Why is that?
Yeah, well, if we look at the canonization just a couple of years ago of St. John Paul II, one of the great saints in the history of the church, drew a lot of criticism from the secular media. I expect the same thing. You know, the late Christopher Hitchens was one of her most ardent critics. At the time of her death in 1997, he was considered a bit of an outlier. Today, a lot of Hitchens's approach to Christianity, to religion in general, is gone mainstream. So I expect that the secular media is going to be picking up a lot of the criticism that was leveled at her previously. But it's not going to work, as we saw with St. John Paul II, this extraordinary moment of his canonization, and now her canonization, I think will blast away all of the negativity.
So we are about a little over 2 weeks until this actually happens. What can we do right now to get ready for that?
Yeah, the big thing for us is to give thanksgiving to God for having raised up such a beautiful saint. The other thing, too, is to become more aware of what Mother Teresa had to say. What did she say about the sanctity of human life, the dignity of the human person from conception to natural death? Support pro-life movements and do everything we can to support life.
It's interesting thinking back at Mother Teresa's life and how we saw her on TV interacting with celebrities and with public officials, Princess Diana, Hillary Clinton, for example.
Yeah. Well, Mother Teresa had a beautiful relationship with the Princess Diana. They prayed together in Rome in 1992, and I think Mother Teresa helped Princess Diana to put her life together. In sharp contrast was her encounter with Hillary Clinton in 1994 at the National Prayer Breakfast. Those two things actually are related in a way, because Mother Teresa was always the same. She was always proclaiming the same thing, Christ Jesus and the dignity of the human person. That was a message that could resonate across the world, and she always used those opportunities to meet with celebrities to take that message outward, and people who perhaps had never even heard of her understood what she was saying because it's so innately true.
Matthew Bunsen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you.
EWTN is planning full coverage of Mother Teresa's canonization. Our crews will take you to the vigil, catechesis, canonization, and Mass of Thanksgiving. You'll see it all right here on EWTN next month. A new biblical-era film, Ben-Hur, opens in theaters today.
In the arena, there is no law. Racing is a blood sport. If you lose, you die.
The film follows a Jewish prince's quest for revenge against his Roman friend turned enemy. And there's a meeting with Jesus. An earlier version of the movie from 1959 won 11 Academy Awards. Catholic film critic and deacon Stephen Graydonis says the two aren't very comparable.
The filmmakers are really pitching it not so much as a remake of the 1959 film as a new interpretation or reimagining of the original novel by General Lew Wallace, which was a huge bestseller. Lew Wallace really told the story because he wanted to investigate Christ as a historical figure. I would say there is more Jesus in this version than in previous film versions. That doesn't necessarily mean that it comes off as more Christ-centered or that the Christ material itself is better. I don't really think that it is.
Deacon Graydonis says the characters are thinly drawn, the drama isn't convincing, and the Jesus material falls flat. Until Monday, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Jason Calvi. Good night and God bless.